Hello, my name is Josh Bayles, and I'll be giving a presentation on the buckskin trade in the southern colonies. Um, as a person who was pretty interested in a lot of different colonial history, I grew up in northern Michigan where we went and visited things like Fort Michilimackinac and other things that were part of the beaver trade and expansion in the northern colonies. Always had an interest in it to include frontier history of the southern states, Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Ohio Valley. So for my environmental history research, I decided to focus on an area I didn't know much about, the buckskin trade, and how much of an impact it did have on colonial life, the politics of the colonies, the impacts of expansion of the trade and settlers into Native American lives, and just some of the overall implications that are still felt from having had the buckskin trade in the southern colonies. So we'll begin with in the southern colonies of North America, the trade in deer hides became a central part of the economies of those colonies. They include what is now North Carolina, South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. The trade in deer hides created an economy that changed the traditional life ways of the Native Americans who lived in this region and provided income for recently arrived Euro American colonists and profit for their European investors. Now, without the trade in deer hides, the expansion of trading posts, trading parties would not have moved into the remote areas, bring with them the products of the Native Americans became dependent upon, and there was the interplay of the commerce that caused some of these things. And there were other facets that happened, such as once the deer hide trade boomed, numbers of game animals went down. Native American peoples became more reliant upon cattle, pigs as meat sources, while deer hides still became they were still trade items. So it was kind of weird that they started raising uh, domestic wildlife for food while still retaining hunting for items to trade. So in South Carolina, the deerskin trade became a primary source of trade after the enslavement of Native Americans was outlawed at the end of the Yamasee War in 1716. Prior to that, there was a lot of trading going back and forth. Native tribes um, enslaving other native tribes to market them as slaves, and there was just a lot of unrest of who was in charge of the colonies and what was going on. So after that war, there was a little more formal agreements with the Cherokee tribes to stop the slave trade, but also to build up the beginning trade in buckskins and other furs. Now, while this was going on, the native tribes also became a buffer between expansion of French settlements in Louisiana and Spanish settlements in Florida. So it was to the benefit of the colonies to establish a trading partner with the Cherokee because the Cherokee could impede how the movement of French and Spanish north. Now, the trade operated roughly from 1716 into the 1800s. After 1800, the number of deer hides were kind of going down. More expansion of settlers from the East Coast had happened, so the numbers were not there. And a lot of the traditional Native American hunting methods, they were getting pushed out. So it just kind of it dwindled down. Trade still happened in buckskins, but it wasn't a primary source of income. Now, horses and cattle also became part of that problem, or not problem, but need. As a number of hides were gathered, horses became vital to transporting hides to market. More horses meant more cost, so it was just a circle of economics of more hides gained, more horses needed, more money spent, requiring more hides. So it was a vicious cycle that impacted both the Native Americans and the Euro American settlers and traders. Now, the buckskin trade impacts on the Euro Americans. This was a very complex trade where it took Europeans, Native American, Africans, tied into a complex system that had cultural economic rules of who operated where, what was offered to who could become a owner of skins, who could only trade them. It was a very complex process. Now, some of the other things that was different is it provided a source of income for uh, poor Euro American farmers and newly arrived Europeans. In Europe, the hunting of game animals was strictly for the wealthy and royalty. Here in America, if you had the means to purchase a firearm, you could hunt game, support your family, and then sell the hide. It was a completely new market where it became central to the image of what America offered, that people could come here and take from the wilderness or take from, nature, support their family with both food and income. So it was a new experience for those settlers, and it became ingrained into their way of life, the psyche, their image. It just became central to it, and it's still seen today in some areas with hunters, and especially in the southern states where hunting has been such a ingrained tradition. Now, these trips are if hunters decide to go over the Blue Ridge Mountains, they could be going up to 2 years, living off what they carried with them, possibly using horses, possibly using canoes. They went out there, hunted, traded, did whatever they could do, and then would make their way back to the settlements, sell their buckskins, pay off their debts, maybe move leapfrog their families a little bit closer to their hunting grounds, and then do it again. Now, some of those hunters were actually recently released indentured servants, people that were leaving England due to uprisings of Scotland, various means. They came here and they saw that harvesting buckskins was a way to make their income with possibly the intent of starting farming, raising horses, cattle, other ways. But they saw that harvesting of those skins was a means to an end of being able to accomplish their goals. They didn't set out to overharvest the animals. They just saw that they were a source of income and a commodity to be used. Now, traders moved among some of the tribes. A lot of traders were primarily of Scottish descent. With the unrest in Scotland and England, a lot of folks got pushed out, sent to the colonies. They were sold as indentured servants for a variety of reasons. The Scottish became the primary operators of trading and being traders and setting up trading establishments in the southern colonies. This is a little bit different. We're in the northern colonies. They were of different descent, but primarily the southern colonies was the Scottish. And it also happened that the Scottish Highlanders had similar cultural ideals to the Native Americans, where it allowed for a little smoother transition into intermarrying with the Native American tribes. They also had a similar enemy in the British or royal governments. So that could have also had, friend of my friend is my enemy a little bit, but it's just kind of interesting that Scottish heritage, they were absorbed into the Native American cultures a little bit easier than other European immigrants. Now, the buckskin trade impacts on the colonies. Those trade relationships with the Cherokee and Creek tribes did create those buffers between the British colonies and their other rivals. If you gave the Cherokee and Creek tribes some guns, and they were able to keep away the Spanish or the French, it was to your benefit. You also traded with them, so you made some money from it. So it became a pretty common relationship. A lot of I said before, the Scottish came. They became pretty ingrained in the buckskin trade and operation of trading establishments. Something that kind of caught my eye was a lot of these indentured servants were either under contract or ran away, something. They ended up being involved in this trade pretty heavily because they saw it a means to escape, way to make money. And they might have even been part of the trading post establishment that were brought over as indentured servants, were released and became part of it. There's just a lot of different stories if you read of kind of wild tales of people that were captured in the battlefields in Scotland, sold as indentured servants, came to America, worked through their contract, and then bam, they became well-known business owners in the South. And then as the land was overhunted, hunters moved, it became open for settlement, forcing those hunters farther afield in search of their game. Same hand, it sent the Native Americans further afield, and they became more dependent on the Euro-American commerce goods to support their lives. Now, some of the buckskin trade legacies for Euro-American hunters, the ability to harvest game without worry of breaking the law became part of their identity. Some places like South Carolina, Georgia, hunting as a family, a group activity is still ingrained in their history and will always be there just because they began when they could do it away from being punished for it, and now it would be hard to take that away. The Scottish traders became an integral part of the Southern political establishment. The deerskin trade was a vital part of the economy up until it was replaced by large-scale cotton plantations. As settlements pushed further west, more and more land became, used for farming and agriculture, so the deer numbers just kind of went down. Hunters did continue to move in search of deer herds. there were still market hunters going on for meat, not supposedly, the skin trade up until the 1900s. Deer were always harvested to sell commercially for meat. It's just the numbers weren't as plentiful, and it wasn't just a robust economy of it. Small towns, rural areas, people still did shoot deer, take it to the store, sell the meat, maybe sell the skin, use the skin. It still happened. And then some places like Missouri, Arkansas, they also participated in the deer skin trade, but they sold their furs into other, uh, more into French colonial areas instead of all the way back to the East Coast. Now, as encroachment settlers moved west, the Native Americans were continued to be pushed, but they did have positive relationships and fought in the American Revolution on the side of the American colonies. They fought against the British in the War 1812 with us, but then in the end, they were still forced out of their lands to other places with the encroachment of more white settlers. Now, this was the continued commodification of North American wildlife was always seen as a way for that pioneer to make some income to support his family. It happened with the buffalo in the 1870s. It happened with the beaver trade in the northern states and with the mountain, Rocky Mountain West mountain man era. Even after the buffalo were gone, there was still a commodity market for the bones to be sold as fertilizer. So it's just a continuous cycle here in North America where wildlife is seen as a commodity, able to be harvested, used for, money or money and food or any combination, that it's just a way that it's just ingrained, good or bad. It's just the way it is. So this is little information about the Southern buckskin trade. There is a lot more research than I ever would have thought on this because it was such a vital part of the Southern economy. The Southern economy, back to the investors. It was a way for, somebody newly arrived could make his fortune, like we hear over and over and over again with American history. But this one, it was there. It happened. I mean, some very prominent, people in our American history. Daniel Boone was a buckskin trade hunter. He pushed over the mountains, harvested deer, sold those. Some of the other figures, a little bit of Davy Crockett, Andrew Jackson, a lot of those, late 1700s, early 1800s famous Americans were tied into the buckskin trade in some way, and just was part of our early colonial heritage. And on the flip side of that is, the buckskin trade, Native American tribes becoming part of it, being accustomed to needing those, trade goods, market hunting. It became a way for them to become dependent, and it also invited in outsiders into their homes and made it a little easier for them to be pushed away because they had so many intermarryings. Cultures were getting kind of bled away. Certain tribes were absorbed into other groups. So there's just a lot of changes going along the the settlements and in the native villages in the 17 and 1800s. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I love learning about this topic. Have a great day.